Welcome, everybody, to our continuing series where we interview professors, scholars, reporters, activists, anybody from across the spectrum, red or blue. We don't care. We want to get intelligent, full-form thoughts directly to you, the public, so that you can do this thing that was popular when I was back in high school, not so popular these days, called thinking for yourself. I don't know, maybe we'll have a renaissance, maybe not. With us today, it's Kimberly Rios, professor at the College of Arts and Sciences at Ohio University. And she has been kind enough to come out and do an interview today. She's had an associate professor of psychology at Ohio University. She's also taught, and then in 2013, she was also teaching at Ohio. She was assistant professor of psychology at the University of Chicago, and she was assistant professor of communication and, by courtesy, psychology at Ohio State University. She received her PhD from Stanford University, Graduate School of Business. That's excellent. And she also received her BA with honors in psychology from Stanford University. Excellent university. I think it's the best in America according to international rankings. Maybe I could be wrong. Rios focuses her work on better understanding how individuals respond to threats to social and personal identities, with a particular focus on majority versus minority identity. Her areas of research within this work include studying the factors that influence majority group members' perceptions of threats from attitudes towards minority groups and vice versa. Much of Rios' work in this area examines reasons the majority group members may see multiculturalism, the recognition and celebration of diversity, as threatening, and ways to reduce the feelings of threat. She also studies the causes and consequences of stereotyping, prejudice amongst religious majorities, negative stereotypes about Christian scientific abilities, and minorities, negative stereotypes about atheists, morality, and trustworthiness, both within the U.S. and cross-culturally. Rios is interested in a wide variety of research topics related to intergroup relations, self and identity, and attitude social influence. She explains that identities can be derived from many sources, including membership in social categories and personal characteristics, opinions, and belief. She's done a lot of study on white identity, white people problems, explaining anti-atheist discrimination, religious diversity in science, exploring the effects of promoting feminine leaders on women's interest in STEM, understanding perceptions of radical and liberal feminists, white self-identification, feeling correct is feeling prejudiced, examining Christians' reactions. So a lot of work in this particular area. Her research interests include membership in social categories, personal characteristics. The overarching goal of the professor's work is to better understand how individuals respond to threats to their social and personal identities, with a particular focus on majority versus minority identity. We'll leave it there. Professor, did I get anything wrong? Is there something we need to correct or state differently?
Super minor thing, but actually last year I was promoted to full professor. I know that's correct in the byline, but not completely up to date on my CV.
Full professor.
Yeah, although I concede that that doesn't mean a whole lot to
the lay public,
most people in the world.
So we all we heard was professor. Now you're going, I'm a this type professor versus that type professor. Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Once again, I really appreciate your having me today.
And I appreciate the contact. I think it was we've been able to keep these conversations going through having people reference others.
Yeah, Amber Gaffney is a friend.
I was going to say, was it Amber Gaffney? I was okay. Yes, it was Amber. I'm sorry, because I thought that's the name that came to my head, but I didn't want to say the wrong name because I was thinking also Ann Oberhauser, but that was a different professor, so I apologize.
Yeah, Amber is a wonderful scientist and human being.
She was awesome. Her interview was really in depth, and I think I was talking to my mom about her, and I was saying she was one of the most informed professors that I had interviewed out of the entire series. So
yeah,
my mom liked that, but she was just a vast wealth of knowledge. I was kind of blown away. That was a big hookup.
Did you know she had an entire past life as a professional cyclist?
I did not, but I did see. pictures of her in athletic gear or like athletic coaching gear. So
Yep.
I understood some sort of I thought she was a coach. I didn't know she was a professional cyclist.
Yeah. Yeah, back in the day.
Wow. Um, yeah. And there was another, I'm off this morning. There was another professor that I had interviewed and I had known from a while back. She had studied California as an independent country and she was also at Humboldt. And so I think that helped with getting to know Amber. And then Amber led to you. So it's just been an awesome connection. And we get really far by having people reference others. So I hope that you find this is a pleasant interview with no gotcha questions. And I'll ask you at the end if that's what you felt I asked Amber. Let me start gently because you are well versed in psychology to an expert degree. A lot of people aren't. So I want to try to take that high level field and bring it to the level where the average person can understand it. So let me
Sure.
ask some very simplistic questions and answer them as best as you want. Um, is America politically polarized in your opinion? You're an academic. You're also an American. You live here and you have two eyeballs and it looks like they work. Um,
For the
things
most
working
part.
out totally fine? Or are we experiencing some sort of problem? I mean, I imagine you've been around more than 5 years. Are things worse than they were 5 years ago? Does it look like there's an issue, or is this just overblown and just something sensational the news says, and there's nothing really to be worried about? Which one should we think?
Yeah. So, thank you for that question. I would say uh, the short answer is yes. We in the United States are very politically polarized. And from my personal as well as professional experience, I would also say that this polarization has exacerbated in recent years. So, I think back to the first election in which I ever voted and was eligible to vote. This dates me a little bit, but it was 2000, George W. Bush versus
Hey,
Al.
versus Al Gore.
Yep. I was a sophomore in college, and this is complete full disclosure. This might horrify some of my friends and colleagues now, but back when I was 18 years old, didn't hadn't had fully formed ideological opinions of my own, and grew up in a mostly back then San Diego, my hometown, was
Okay,
mostly leaning red. So I
very
was a
military.
George W. Bush supporter, and I did vote for him in 2000, not again in 2004. um, and I was in my dorm that year. I was one of two people who were pro George W. Bush, and this was in a dorm of about 50. Now, granted, there could have been others who stayed silent and who weren't openly voicing their support in an ultra liberal university environment, but I was one of only two who were openly supportive of him. And the night of the election, we had the TV going on, and people were sort of good naturedly jabbing each other about, oh, who looks like they're winning versus not winning. And the atmosphere was even among those who disagreed with one another relatively pleasant. And I think back to the 2008 election. This was, of course, Obama versus McCain. And for a lot of people, I think the stakes were higher. I mean, this was a momentous occasion. By that time, I was a self identified Democrat, so I was definitely pro Obama. And I attended an election party at my friend's house where, again, it was mostly good natured. There were some Democrats, some Republicans, and they actually had they they had Fox News playing in one room for the Republicans and CNN playing in the other room for the Democrats, and we all had a good laugh about it. And uh, we and nobody left, regardless of who they had supported or voted for, having made any enemies or feeling really devastated about the outcome. Now, I contrast both of those experiences with the 2016 election. Again, I was out and about. I was at a party. It was a former student's birthday, and the mood. We were mostly Clinton supporters. The mood started really joyful. no enthusiasm. Uh,
like
I
that,
was,
like that Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock skit on Saturday Night Live.
uh-huh.
As the evening progresses, people drink more.
Yeah, I mean, I'll plead the fifth on that, but
All right,
definitely
I'm just sorry. Yeah,
evening
never mind. So
progressed.
what happened election night? Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. So I showed up wearing this navy blue pantsuit, and I had actually taken a selfie after I voted with this is Jimmy, my little rescue dog. Jimmy and I were wearing matching suits and took a
Oh
selfie
my
together after I voted.
God. Yes.
And yeah,
Like, because Hillary Clinton wore pantsuits, everybody.
yes,
So, yes. Okay.
yes, and throughout the course of the night, the mood got progressively worse and worse. I mean, granted, that wasn't the entire country, but I was in a left-leaning environment. My husband, who was then my fiance, we were in a long-distance relationship. I was in Ohio, he was in Washington, D.C. So he was in the state capitol, and he was telling me at first he thought it was ridiculous that Donald Trump could ever win. But then he called me a couple times throughout the night, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting really nervous." And he's an immigrant. He's actually from Germany, so it the stakes were, I think, especially high for him. And yeah, after I remember the next day, it just felt like the apocalypse. I went to the pharmacy, pick up a prescription. Nobody was there, and people were just uh, in this really weird and despondent mindset. So, yeah, I think those are so that's just a long way of me saying that on a personal level, I have observed increases in polarization. And I think from a professional level, when I think about this through the lens of the kinds of topics that I'm studying, one thing that really contributes to this increased polarization is the fact that uh, politics doesn't really or don't really mean what they used to in our society. It's not just about, oh, you prefer this or that person, you have this or that attitude toward a particular policy. Politics have become so enmeshed with many of our identities, our value systems, our morals. So it's now an entire way of life for a lot of people. And uh, again, for many Americans, uh, they see their views on political and ideological issues as tantamount to human rights issues, really. So I think this is, and I'm not saying whether this is good or bad, better or worse, but it's just the way that it has increasingly come to be in the States.
Tell me about the 2022 election. You did a good review of all the elections over the last 20 years. What was the mood like? Did you go to a group of friends? What was the mood like on the 2020 election? Sorry. We
Ooh,
covered up to the
2020.
2016, and it was bad. Was the 2020 election better? And everybody was super jovial and happy and said, America's fixed. Biden won. Trump lost. We're all back together. Everything's fixed. No problems. Yay!
You're talking about the aftermath and not the process. Those are, I guess, two different
Sure.
things.
Tell me about election night of the 2020 election when Biden won. What was the feeling? We're all better. Everything's over. We can forget the 2016 election and go back to how we felt in 2008. Or we've kind of won, but oh my God, I feel like I survived the Vietnam War and I'm going to have scars the rest of my life. What's more? Tell us. What did you see?
Yeah. So 2020 was, of course, also the year of COVID. So a lot of people probably weren't gathering with friends and were social distancing at home, myself included. I was about 12 weeks pregnant with my son. And because one of my friends and I decided that the real world was scary enough, we we had an Amazon watch party and we watched that old 1982 horror movie, The Thing. So
That's the best movie ever.
it was awesome.
I'm
So I was
so
watching The
wow.
Thing in one bedroom, and my husband's in the other bedroom, keeping meticulous track of the polling results. And I would hear him sort of grunt at one set of results and then breathe a sigh of relief at another. And I was like, I just can't do this right now. Tell me when it's all over. And it didn't end up being all over for a couple more days. So
So instead of watching the 2020 election, you decided to watch one of the most horrific and gory horror movies out there instead because it was less scary. Okay.
indeed.
Uh,
Yeah, and
there you go. There you go. So, but what was the mood like when you talked to your friends in the days afterwards? Hey, oh, we're past Trump. It's all good. Everything's fine. Boy, we survived. We made it to the promised land now. Or did you see something else?
I would say a little bit of both. So, in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election, there was some cautious relief and optimism, but still some uncertainty uh, because a lot of us knew there were debates about well, whether the election was stolen and whether there would be protests that uh, that arose in future weeks, months, etc. Um, so yeah, I would say although in my immediate household, we were, my husband and I were thinking, we're bringing a child into this world, and we feel grateful personally that we're not bringing him into the world in the Trump presidency. uh, so that was our view. But one thing that I think has become evident in this era of increased polarization, it's not just between the two parties. It's not just, oh, were you a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter? I saw a lot of my very left of center friends say on social media who were not and still are not happy with Biden at all. So, for example, there's some people who were really hardcore Sanders supporters and who almost think it's worse if you're someone who claims to be left of center but was supporting Biden, almost like, oh, well, you're afraid to be a real progressive and to embrace real social change. And I would bet that a similar dynamic may have been going on with the Republican candidates. So maybe there's some who think, well, Donald Trump is the real embodiment of what it means to be a true and a good Republican. And if you're supporting somebody else, then that's somehow less than. So I think there is this polarization both between parties and increasingly within parties, which makes, again, I think it exacerbates this situation.
So after the 2020 election in America, there was a lot of talk about how America had chosen Biden and Trump had lost. And we had turned a page and we were getting better. In Germany and much of Europe, the response was completely opposite. What they found was you said you were going to repudiate Trump, America. Joseph Biden winning by about 51% is really only 1.2% over half. That's not a repudiation at all. We don't think you guys repudiated anything, and we're terrified of being associated with you. That's largely what they talked about on German news afterwards. I was telling my friends, like, here's an American headline and here's a German newspaper headline. See how they're totally different? One's celebratory and the other's like, are you kidding me? You said you were done with this guy and you got rid of him by 1.5%. That's not a repudiation at all. You didn't repudiate anything. Who the hell are you guys? Did your husband see any of that? Share any of those sentiments? Aware of any of that? He's a German national.
Yeah, yeah, he is. So I think on for his part, there was mostly relief. I'm not sure what the members of his extended family all thought, or if they fell on different ends of the spectrum in that regard. But I can say that it's been interesting going overseas. I mean, we haven't, because first the pandemic happened and then we had a baby. We have
Right.
not been overseas to visit his family in Germany since 2019. So
Okay.
I haven't observed firsthand or talked with them firsthand on their reactions to this most recent presidential election. But one thing that I thought was interesting in I believe this was 2017. So it was my first visit to Germany after Trump had won. And the discussion turned to American politics, much to my chagrin. Um, and Dom is kind of, that's my husband. He's kind of a jokester. So he had this bright idea to tell his family members who didn't know me all that well yet that I voted for Donald Trump and that I was
Nice.
son of
Nice.
Hitler, neither of which is true. And
That's
so,
hilarious.
what are you doing? So afterward, I think we were with my husband's sister and her husband, so my sister and brother-in-law, and it's like, gosh, these days I feel kind of embarrassed to be American and to go abroad, given what you all think of this person that we put into office. And then my brother-in-law said something like, well, you're somebody who has a passport, who travels overseas and is more internationally conscious. You're not the kind of American that we all think is, that we're all sitting over here laughing about or incredulous about.
True, 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 true.
We recognize that there are these different factions. So I think
Sure.
even within Germany, there is this acknowledgement of political polarization.
Wow. It's even over there. They understand it. Uh, I have a couple of questions, but first I want to go to January 6th. So, hey, I watched the 2000 election, 2004, 2008, 2020. 2020 looks like, hey, we're turning the page. We got rid of Trump. He's gone. Biden won. Then January 6th happens. And it's like, I thought we were getting rid of Trump. We're not getting rid of him. And then afterwards, you have a lot of the country saying, well, that was wrong. But then the Republican Party walks that back. And now we're down to where, most of the Republican Party doesn't think January 6th anything happened wrong with that. So personal experiences with that, the responses from friends and family, like, damn, I thought we were done with Trump. Or maybe they were saying after January 6th, like a lot of people were, maybe you can't fix this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I remember January 6th very, very well. So again, this was still the height of COVID where people were isolating. And we had just returned, my husband and Jimmy the dog and I, from a trip to Cuyahoga National Forest in the Cleveland area. So it was, we stayed in an Airbnb, went hiking for a couple of days in ice cold weather, and we come back, and all of a sudden, this is going on. The one silver lining, the one thing that made that day anything but absolutely horrific for both of us to hear about was that was the day that we both felt the baby move for the first time. So I do prefer to remember January 6th in those terms, but
Sure.
another, I mean, another perspective I have is just the amount of discord there was. I mean, my social media feed, which I do have I do have some political and ideological diversity, since I do have a very politically diverse family, and
Good.
some friends who are occupy different ends of the political spectrum as well. But that said,
Rare these days.
uh, most of the responses on social media were utterly horrified. Oh my gosh, what's happening? I'm not sure about the state of this country. I'm not feeling great right now. But in some personal conversations that I've had, say, with family members who have different ideological views than what I have, it wasn't a one size fits all reaction. I mean, there were some people in the United States who didn't think that that anything particularly egregious transpired that day. And so I think when we're living in our own little echo chambers, we do tend to think that, oh, everybody agrees with us and everyone sees this event in the same way that we do. But uh, decades and decades of social psychology research, it's my own field, has shown that people can see the exact same footage of an event and come back with wildly different interpretations of what was going on based on their identities. So I don't know if
That's brilliant.
just an example, this is a very old classic social psych study from the 1950s, and it's called They Saw a Game. And I think it was, I don't quote me 100% on this, but if I remember correctly, uh, it was a group of undergraduates from an East Coast school. It was either Princeton or Dartmouth. And they were shown footage of a Princeton versus Dartmouth football game. And were asked questions about who they thought was most aggressive, who they thought should have won, or was playing better, was playing more or less fairly, those sorts of things. And people overwhelmingly saw this game through a different lens depending on what their institutional affiliation was. So the
Right.
Princeton students were basically saying, oh, yeah, I can't believe how aggressive the Dartmouth players were. Princeton totally deserved to win. Whereas the Dartmouth students were saying the exact same thing, but about the other side.
There's I forget the name, but one of the well-known authors in the field of political polarization was talking about how there's some early psychology studies that seem to suggest that humans are hardwired to form groups and then to differentiate our group from another group. And that in our evolution, like I'm with us, you're not us. So we still have that wired into us. What bothered me about January 6th was a year after. It was, I mean, I was really bothered about January 6th, but I was more bothered a year after because the Republicans started walking it back. You used to have, I mean, immediately after January 6th, the first couple of weeks, you had some sort of consensus that that was bad. And within a year, you were back to half the country thought, nah, I don't think it's that bad. You know, I'm like, you guys saw this thing. This is a coup. And now we have half the country was walked back thinking, yeah. To me, that was, at least we had some unity for about 2 weeks that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then that evaporated. I almost felt like we watched the Holocaust, and then a year later, people going, yeah, it's not, kind of felt it was bad. It's not as bad. I'm like, guys, it's as bad as you thought it was on day one. How can we even live in a country where we can walk this back? That doesn't sound rational or stable. I want to ask you 2 questions coming at your psychological background. One of the debate that people who have studied political polarization at an academic level have had is that they've said, well, there is no polarization of the people. It's all the elites, and the elites encourage the people to do this. And if the elites were gone, the people wouldn't do this. So the people don't have polarization in themselves. It's only the elites signaling them to do this that makes this happen. So we can't say the people are polarized. Other people call that theory garbage and say the people are, of course, polarized. You're not as versed in the academic literature on political polarization, but you are an expert with psychology, and you have lived in America for 20 years, and you have 2 eyeballs that work, and you're aware and don't live in a cave. Expert of psychology, person who's lived on the ground, lived the experience with the trained mind. Are the people polarized, or are they not? Is it just the elites making this happen? And if Trump went away, everybody would just snap right back together and we'd go right back to the 2004 election where we were totally cool. Is that which one? I don't know. Professors are debating with each other who's to believe. The people are actually part of the problem, or the people are innocent angels. They would never do this on their own, and the elites made them. And as soon as we pull the elites, Humpty Dumpty comes right back together. Which one seems more realistic to you, who's lived the experience over the last 20 years and has professional training in how humans think?
Well, I would say short answer first, the truth is likely somewhere in between. So, although elites definitely contribute to political polarization, in my view, so oftentimes the loudest and most extreme voices are the voices that receive the most attention, elite or otherwise, and that get characterized as being the most representative of one side or another. So, uh, I think that's something that to which elites definitely contribute. But when you consider what the reality is, what most people's views are, uh, in actuality, most Democrats probably don't have views that are as extreme as those as, say, Bernie Sanders, nor do most Republicans have views that are as extreme as, say, Donald Trump's. Uh, but that said, I do think that Donald Trump in particular is just a super convenient target. And I think as psychologists and as humans, we like to look for clear uh, and convenient explanations for events that seem troubling or threatening. And if we have this scapegoat to blame, like Donald Trump, then we think, well, at least we know where the problem is. If this guy gets out of office and if he's vanquished from the political memories of most Americans anytime soon, then our problem's solved. And I think that serves a purpose for people. It helps reduce these feelings of threat and uncertainty. But I highlighted some of my experiences with recent and not so recent presidential elections. But there was a whole lot that went on in between, say, 2008 and 2016, that had nothing to do with Donald Trump. So I'm thinking, for example, about the debates over same sex marriage legislation that were taking place well before Donald Trump was even known as a political figure. Well, a TV show host and a businessman, sure, but never somebody that anybody thought would go into politics. So, there were these debates about same sex marriage that polarized different factions of the US. There was the Black Lives Matter movement and its inception, and the responding movements of Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. A lot of people will have in their minds the George Floyd murder of 2020 as when these movements really gained momentum. But I think of these movements as having started in the early 2010s with, for example, Trayvon Martin in Florida and the Ferguson, Missouri riots and protests. Black Lives Matter was a movement in existence far before Donald Trump even came to fruition politically. And so I think those are just some examples of how of different ways in which Americans and America have been polarized for a while now. And I think another example is the census projections that America by the mid 21st century is predicted to become a majority minority nation where people of color are projected to outnumber white people. Now, this is for a lot of research in my field and in my own lab shows that for many white people in the US, this is an incredibly threatening projection. And this projection has been, again, in existence since at least 2010. So I wouldn't say, oh, polarization started with this or that political figure or even group of elites. It's more like a confluence of events that led to more and more of a growing sentiment of, these are not just politics, these are identities and morals and entire belief systems that are rooted in the self.
It sounds like you're saying the polarization exists at the people level. Maybe the elites are encouraging it, but I mean, a lot of your stories were about, you're hanging out with just a couple close friends or people that and they're already acting polarized in this small group. When we heard the stories from the 2000 election to 2008 to 2016, market difference there, and that's I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, that Donald Trump or Barack Obama showed up to any of those personal gatherings and said, let me jump in and give you my personal opinion, right? That's all just individuals reacting how they feel. And we can see the polarization on the ground. elites obviously caused some of it, but I appreciate the answer because I felt that was, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy that it was all just elites and that the people themselves weren't polarized, because I've seen it on the ground myself. Also, you have studies showing that in 2012, only about a third of Democrats and Republicans would be upset if they dated, or someone they knew dated outside of their party, and then it was 55% by 2020. So I mean, that's not the elites. I don't remember Trump saying don't date a Democrat ever, but people interpreted it that way, and we've gone from 30 to 50% at the mass public level. So let me ask you another question. This is another debate. From a little bit from my understand from psychology. So there's two spheres. Trump is the agitator. He's the elite. He's sending signals. That's encouraging people to do it. If you get rid of him and you don't have people who do that kind of dog whistling, signaling, then everybody calms down. The other theory is that once you get people so ramped up and in a fevered pitch, even if you remove the boogeyman or the motivation or the catalyst, it doesn't matter. They're too ramped up now. It's like you get that pot of water boiling, and then you turn off the heat. It's still boiling. It doesn't just stop boiling because you turned off the heat. You've created too much momentum. It lives on its own now. As a professional psychologist, or somebody who has a background on that, what seems more reasonable as somebody who's living here? And I get we're asking you to do some theoretical thinking, but population of 200 to 300 million. What seems more realistic? We got rid of Trump, and people who talk like him go away, and they're not allowed to talk on the national stage. Everyone calms down. Or you have exacerbated tension so high, you have put ideas into people's heads, and they just don't go away that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think removing any one or even a few political figures is going to solve these issues and reduce polarization. I mean, I think with again, Donald Trump is a convenient target, and we probably all like to think that as soon as we remove one person or one so-called bad apple, then we don't have a problem anymore. But I think some research within my field suggests that one of one thing that transpired in the wake of Donald Trump's increasing political popularity was people becoming emboldened to say and do things that they wouldn't have been emboldened to say or do in the past. So, for example, to use language that isn't politically correct, to speak up against what they perceive as the woke, overly PC norms of society. And so I think, again, it wasn't just Donald Trump. It was the fact that a lot of people felt, who supported him, probably felt a certain way, and then thought once they saw this guy saying whatever he felt like on the national news, oh, wow, here's somebody I can really relate to. Here's somebody who's not afraid to express what he really thinks and who seems authentic. And I think this perception of authenticity in politicians and public figures it goes a long way in both instigating support for particular figures and thinking about, oh, what's okay or what's not okay to say nowadays. And so now we are in this, despite that we have a new president, we've got Biden in office now for a couple of years. There's all sorts of language that persists or debates about language. For example, are we okay? So are we going to use certain terms like? Are we going to stick with Latino and Latina to describe people of Latin American descent, or are we going to use Latinx or Latine? I see you shaking your head. I've got thoughts.
97% of Latinos don't use the term Latinx, so I'll just leave it there. It's
Yeah,
we're
I've
talking
got
about democracy and minorities get to pick how they're called. I don't know who came up with that term, but it wasn't us. So we'll just leave it there. Just leave
yeah.
it there.
Yeah, and some of my own data suggests that the majority of Hispanic and Latino people in my surveys think that Latinx is a term that is used and created primarily by whites who are not Hispanic or who are not connected to the community.
That is what we think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this, I mean, language like this has become so moralized. Like, if you continue, I mean, uh, my mom was born in Puerto Rico, so she identifies as Latina, as do I.
Orale. Orale.
Uh, yeah, and she hates the term Latinx, and it's but there I know there are some that if
I
they
don't
hear
hate it. I don't hate it. I just want to say this term came out of nowhere. When I talk to Latin people, they're like, I don't know where that came from. So if you talk to any other ethnic group and you go, hey, here's the term for you, and they go, we didn't make that up, that would not be accepted. But for some reason with Latin people, it's cool. And then we have 97% of them saying, I've never heard of this. I never voted for it. Nobody asked me. I don't embrace it. How did this even get started? I thought ethnic groups get to pick their own terms. How do we even get this far with 97% of the population saying I have no association with the term? I don't want to get into it. It's neither here nor there. Just a side piece. I am Latin, so
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's relevant because this is an example of using language to create polarization. So even among people who are, say, ideologically left of center, there's sometimes intense debate over, oh, if you're not using Latinx or Latine, then you're not being inclusive of people who don't necessarily identify as male or female. And then you get, on the other hand, well, if you're using Latinx or Latine, you're just catering to people who don't even identify as that in the first place.
it's
So,
European chauvinism is what it is. It's non-Latino people telling them what they're going to do, like we saw in the 1800s. So that would be my response for anybody saying, I have helped transgendered candidates run for office. I have, and I'm helping an LGBTQ candidate who's running for governor. Very sympathetic, but this is different. If
mhm.
we went to the African American group and said, hey, a bunch of white people came up with the term for you guys, that's cool, right? Asians, Arabs, it wouldn't fly. Why is it okay to do it to us? That's my question. How this
Yeah.
even get started? Who even Latin people don't even know who invented the term. We have no idea who got started, what group started using this term, and that should tell you everything. If we can't even date it, I mean, at least African Americans could look at. I think it was a famous African American poet who said we want to be called African Americans, and there was a
Mhm.
conversation with Clinton. There was something they could date to a member of their community. We have nothing like that for this term. Who started this? Who did? We don't know. How does that mean inclusion if we have no clue who started this?
Yeah, I
And we have
think
no pictures of it being a Latin person.
I think that there is some lore about it starting or originating in with members of the queer community in Puerto Rico. But when I've tried to look online for the truthfulness of that claim, I can't really get a straight answer. And again, nobody knows. Nobody can agree.
Really curious, huh?
hmm
Any other ethnic group, they wouldn't put up with this. Here we are, and we're the largest ethnic minority in all of America, and we don't get the same level of respect. Hmm. Hmm.
hmm
Definitely a reason to be patriotic. Let's move on. Can we undo this? I think you're saying no. But tell me if I'm wrong. So Trump's gone. Nobody gets to talk like Trump. Nobody talks like Trump at the no TV, no politician, no talking like Trump anymore, guys. Everybody goes, I'm going to go back to the way I was thinking in 2009. I'm just going to forget the way I behaved the last 5 or 6 years, and I'll go back to the way I was thinking before. Is that a realistic portrayal of the human mind?
No, I mean, people will still, if people wanted to talk like Donald Trump, then they will continue to do so,
Oh,
even in his absence, even if it's
oh.
more behind closed doors or more clandestine than it was back when he was in office. That said, I think there's there are some ways that I could envision that. could or potential solutions to reducing the polarization in this country, although it would take us a very long time to get there. And there's even probably some discrepant opinions. Do we want to bother to fix polarization, or are some people just lost causes? I will talk to a lot of people. So again, I'm fairly left of center. We've established this,
I'm liberal
and
too. I was an ex-Republican, but I got out in 2012, 4 years
oh,
before Trump, when I realized they were going to be racist to Latinos under Romney. So
hmm,
George W. Bush had about 50% of the Latin vote, tied with the Democrats. Romney dropped that back down to 20%. Romney had ties to Mexico and spoke fluent Spanish, but could not mention his ties to Mexico or speak any Spanish. And they went from 50 to 20%. And that's what I realized in 2012. The Republican Party was not going to embrace diversity, but move towards white supremacy. And I predicted that 4 years before Trump. Please continue.
interesting. Yeah. So I was going to say that for some people, so I'm left of center, and for people who identify as even further left of center than I am, there's and I suspect for people who are equally extreme on the other side, there's the sense that, well, I'm on the right side of the law, and all these other people, so the extreme people on the other side, are on the wrong side of the law. And there's no hope reaching these people who are, well, talking from the perspective of an extreme liberal person. These are racist, sexist, homophobic, all the worst kind of isms that you can possibly espouse on the other side. Let's not even bother to reach these people. And if we're trying to fix polarization and come to some sort of middle ground, then we're sacrificing some of our own values and some of our own prospects to see real change. So I see that on the left a lot, and I suspect that the same sorts of debates are going on the extreme right. That they see many of us on the left as a lost cause. Oh well, these people are too woke; they'll eventually go away, and we don't want to meet them in the middle at all. So yeah, I mean, I think it's possible in theory to reduce polarization, but it would take a really long time, and it would take coming to a genuine understanding that in reality, most people are probably not as extreme as the caricatures among the elites or on social media might lead us to believe.
I've
So,
heard, I'm sorry.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I've heard, if you could just comment on this, I've heard some of this. So there's the real polarization, and then there's I think they call it effective or perceived polarization, meaning Democrats believe Republicans have no values and they don't care about America, and Republicans believe Democrats have no values and they don't care about traditional American values. And the perception of the other party is massively off. You perceive them to be worse than they actually are. There might be real polarization between the two of you. You go, you guys are 20% different from me in reality, but I perceive it to be 50% different from me in my mind, just because you're them, you're not me. So there's that difference. Why? I think you answered it, but one more time. Why would it take so long to fix this polarization? What are we talking about? A 5-year project, 10-year project, 20-year project? Are we talking about just the elites could do it, school teachers could do it, or is this something that takes 100 to 200 million people participating over 10 to 20 years to undo this?
I mean, that's a really big question. I'm not sure I have a specific time frame in mind, but I do have some specific reasons to suggest why it would take so long or longer than we might want or might
Please.
expect. So,
Why
as
can't
some
we fix this real quick? Just get Congress to pass a law. We're going to undo gerrymandering. No more mean social media posts. Can't we just pass a law and no mean social media tweets from Trump, and won't everything just snap back together because we passed some law?
or just have people interact with somebody for 5 minutes from the other side.
Yeah, yeah. Can we just have everybody talk to someone who they don't share politics for 5 minutes, and can we snap back together the next year?
If only.
Well,
Yeah.
Professor, I'm hearing this from people in the media saying these are solutions. You're a
Yeah.
professional psychologist. Is it reasonable to say that people are as polarized as we are? You can just snap them back together with a good 5-minute conversation.
No, I mean, I think there is some research in my field that actual or imagined contact between members of different groups can have positive effects on prejudice reduction and increased tolerance. But there are very specific conditions under which contact has positive rather than negative effects. There are a lot of ways that, oh, this really depends. So I think in order for polarization to really decrease, that there has to be well, the right circumstances, the right mindset and motivations among all the parties involved, and oh, just having a simple conversation or a simple law or whatnot won't actually change people's fundamental minds. I mean, as you said before at the beginning of our conversation, we are arguably hardwired as human beings to think in terms of in groups and out groups. And right now, politics and ideologies is one of the biggest intergroup divides in the United States. But if you look at other societies, you also see so Israel versus Palestine, you see polarization that's occurring there along religious and ethnic dimensions. And you see polarization in other societies along the dimensions that they deem important. So there will be probably for as long as we'll live, and no matter what society we're a part of, there will be intergroup dimensions, in groups and out groups as categories. But I do think that recognizing that people that the out group may not necessarily be as extreme as they're portrayed on social media, and making effort, taking initiative to truly listen to the other side and figure out where they're coming from uh, might be one of many potential steps to reducing polarization. So, just as an example, I was in November invited to go to Israel by a friend of mine who's a professor over there and a native Israeli. And he hosted a workshop on interactive listening and human flourishing. And we talked a lot about how important it is to really to to really listen. And it's not just smiling and nodding and hearing what people are saying. It's being able to ask the right questions and truly engage with another person on a human to human level.
You
Now,
have to be genuine. You have to be
yeah,
actually involved and interested in the conversation. You can't say something like, I don't want to talk to you too much because I might share values with you and go against myself. So you have to be willing to move past this mindset, I would say, a little bit.
yeah, yeah, and I would say everybody probably has their own threshold for what makes them more or less comfortable. So I use the example sometimes of a Jewish person. So I'm not Jewish myself, but think about a Jewish person who's confronted with a Holocaust denier. And, I'm not going to tell my Jewish friend, oh, yeah, just listen to what the Holocaust denier has to say and maybe meet them in the middle. I mean,
Right.
that sounds
Right.
completely ridiculous. Probably engaging with this Holocaust denier has the potential to cause real harm to many members of the Jewish community. So I would never advocate for that, for putting oneself in a position where you feel like you or your group could be actively harmed physically or psychologically. But I do advocate for if you're going to feel a little bit of discomfort, then maybe that's not always a bad thing. That's definitely not always a bad thing. Discomfort is sometimes essential to moving past divides and really confronting realities, truly engaging with people who may have different experiences and different perspectives than you do. So, another example of this. In my field right now in social psychology, we're, again, as you might have intimated from our conversation, social psychologists are generally fairly left of center and secular as a whole.
What?
There is my major professional organization, Society for Personality and Social Psychology, has recently introduced, if you're to submit to this conference, this big conference that occurs every year, you need to submit a statement about whether and how your research advances the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals of the organization.
Right.
Now, this new requirement sparked a lot of backlash from people and a lot of debate. I
Hmm.
myself just don't, diversity, equity, and inclusion are part of virtually everything I study. So my personal perspective is, well, I don't care. It's not going to lead me or my lab to do anything different. It's good for society. Why not? What's the harm? But a lot of people who are who are against this see this as well, in their words, an ideological litmus test, and is really problematic as prioritizing some forms of science or some forms of diversity over others. And I found there is on either side of this debate, again, there are caricatures of what the other side thinks. So
Right.
people who are like me, pro DEI statement being mandatory, will say things like, "Oh, well, the people who don't want the DEI statements in there are just anti-diversity. They're racist, they're sexist, et cetera, et cetera." Whereas the people on that side are saying about the pro DEI people, oh, well, you're too woke and you're basically giving in to overly prescriptive values of like political or politicization of an organization that should be about science and not about ideologies. So there's a lot of nastiness on both sides. And I went to a couple of months ago an event uh, at which there was a debate about this DEI policy between somebody who was for it and somebody who was against it.
Right.
And I showed up to this debate along with maybe 40 of my colleagues in social psychology. And just the fact, I feel like just the fact that we were showing up to this event and engaging with people. So, for my part, engaging with people who were against this DEI statement, there was a part of me that thought, well, what if I'm discovered? What if I'm outed as having attended this event and engaging with people who are promoting what others see as racist or white supremacist, et cetera, values? I mean, that was a real concern for
Isn't
some of
that
my.
a kind of discouraging
Oh,
dialogue?
yeah. Yeah, and I think it is a real concern, even in our field. We're enacting this exact type of polarization that we study, that we know has been a human problem for decades, if not centuries or millennia. So it is kind of ironic. But the thing that I took most from this debate that I attended was how, I came in with probably some of the same stereotypes as many of my colleagues who are pro DEI statements. But the person who was anti DEI statements made some reasonable points, as did the person that I agreed most with, who was pro DEI statements. And this person was, or the people on the other side were a lot more reasonable and had a lot more nuanced views of the issue than I had anticipated prior to having attended this event. So for me, I mean, I'm part Latina, but I pass as white for
Same
most
here.
purposes.
Yes.
And so, I'm not somebody who will walk in to this kind of debate and feel like, oh, everybody's looking at me as the token minority person. I don't have that lived experience. So, so I feel like I'm in a relatively privileged position to be able to attend an event like this and not feel that level of discomfort. But at the same time, there was some discomfort, like, oh, what are other people going to think of me for engaging in this way? But that sort of discomfort is healthy, I think. Do
I,
within your threshold, within reason. And I would encourage everybody to find their own threshold of how much can you or will you engage with those who think and feel differently without truly compromising, your own psychological well-being or your own values.
fair enough, because I want to repeat back something I heard.
Okay.
So the way we fix polarization is having these dialogues with people who think differently, and you need to have meaningful dialogue where both of you are genuinely willing to listen. At the same time, you say, a lot of leftists are worried about being outed for even meeting with people on the other side. And then a lot of leftists say, I don't even want to talk to those people myself because if I met with them, I might share values. So don't this and this mean we're going to have a lot less of the conversations it takes to get us out of this?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Because I saw, I had a personal story. I have a lot of liberal friends, and I know a lot of conservatives around America, but Roe v. Wade gets overturned. A lot of my liberal friends are upset. We need to get in the streets. We need to have coalitions. We need to bring reasonable Republicans who understand you cannot take a woman's right away. And we need to form this coalition to make it happen. And I go, great. I know a bunch of conservatives who are willing to stand with you right now in the streets that it is wrong to take a woman's right to change away. Oh, those are the Republicans we're looking for. Let's get with them. Hold on. They also believe the woman's place is in the kitchen. You should have 6 kids. They need to have 15 AR-15s. Church should be ordained and government buildings need to have a cross, but they back you on a woman's right to choose. Let's get going, guys, right? No one took me up on that offer. But 5 minutes before I said that, everybody was saying abortion is the most important issue. There is no issue as important. This is an existential crisis. Pull out all the stops, everything it takes to win. Great. Here you go. Not one taker. When I actually put the specifics up of here's what you just said, no one bothered to bite. 5 minutes before, 100 people. Yeah, let's do it. I'll work with them. Great. Here's the actual people you have to work with. Hell no. And
Yeah.
I didn't tell you that story, but it backs up what you're saying. So I'm like, oh, okay. So you're ready to work with these. I get this impression like liberals are like, I'm willing to work with this Republican who fits my unicorn picture of what a good Republican is. How do you know those people
Mhm.
exist?
Yeah. Basically a Democrat in disguise, right?
Yeah, he's a Democrat. He just doesn't know he is. And I go, that's not a Republican.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give a lot of things up in order to get that thing you want. And
Mhm.
nobody wanted it. They're like, I will work with Republicans who believe in a woman's right to choose and are for banning guns and this and that and this and that. And those are the people I work with. Okay, well, that's not a Republican.
Yeah.
So you're
I
stuck
mean,
to working with yourself.
that's a perfect example of unwillingness to make concessions that might induce discomfort. So, as a woman, it would probably be uncomfortable for me to engage with a man who thinks that the government should decide what women do with their bodies, that I should have 6 kids and stay in the kitchen. Heaven forbid I'm a professor right now, right? Um,
But we were told existential crisis, most important issue in the world, nothing more important, all stops pulled.
yeah, I mean,
So
I
you're
guess.
willing to give up a woman having a right to choose so that you don't have to hang out with people who offend you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Doesn't equal you winning.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, again, perfect example of people
Oh,
not wanting to, maybe even just be seen as giving up or conceding any part of their values. And I mean, I think this brings us full circle in a way. If this is a great example too of politics being so enmeshed in our social identities that, it's, oh, I don't even want to talk to these people uh, who feel the same, who feel a different way on these issues, because doing so would somehow make me a lesser version of myself.
Yep. I get trashed by my fellow liberals for talking to conservatives. So that's the only reason I bring this up, is that I'm doing what everybody recommends, and I am constantly criticized by all my liberal colleagues for doing it. So I'm just like, oh, interesting. And I think I'm one of the few people who's doing it. There's not many people who are liberals and have talked to as many conservatives as I have. I've met many liberals said that. I've met many conservatives do that. Many conservatives say, you're the first liberal I've ever met in 15 years doing this. So
Wow.
who's willing to talk with me? So I get the impression I'm the only one out there doing it. And I get trashed by fellow liberals. So I'm like, how far are we going to get? This is the solution. I'm doing it. Screw you for doing it. How far are we really going to get as a country?
Yeah. I
Doesn't
mean,
seem like very far.
right, right. In some ways, I have no choice but to engage with conservatives unless I want to be out a whole biological family. I mean, my parents are both conservative. About probably half of my relatives are. Most of the younger half is, well, tends to be politically liberal. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've had open and honest conversations with my mom about our various ideological views. And I think it's, some people on the left of center don't think that that's productive and say, well, why bother engaging? But why not? I mean, especially if it's somebody who's that close to you.
Well, how are you going to get the votes if you don't get other voters?
Right.
That's the other thing. All these people vote. You need their votes. I've tried explaining this to liberals, and it still comes across us, yeah, but ooh, gross. And I'm like, okay, but there's this thing called the Constitution. It says the way things get done. You can't do it any other way unless you change that document, and it says you need additional votes. How are you going to get those votes if you don't talk to them and you tell them they're scum within the first 5 minutes of meeting them?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
if you can't get the votes, how are you going to get the law you want? Oh, well, they'll change their mind. They'll realize they were wrong in the future. Okay. How long do you want to wait for them to wake up? 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Your daughter goes without the right to have access to abortion for 30 years, but hey, one day they'll get it, and we'll just hold out for a generation to get there. Is that reasonable to your daughter? I never got a good answer when I asked these questions of fellow liberals. Never got a real good answer. I want to show you a map if I can and ask you, this would be one of the last few questions. So have you ever heard of the Big Sort?
Not by name, but maybe by description.
So the Big Sort is an idea, came out in 1992, roughly in the 90s, by Bill Bishop. And it said that roughly since 1992, Americans have been sorting themselves into ideological communities. So they've been moving, and they're moving to areas. And what's happening is we're getting more ideologically sorted out. So this is a map from the New York Times. 538's backed this up. Other magazines have backed this up. What it's called a landslide election county. So this is a map of counties in presidential elections showing landslide election county. A landslide election county is where one candidate wins by 20 percentage points over the other. Not even close. Basically the kind of vote Biden should have had against Trump to show true repudiation. There's another way of thinking about it. So 1% doesn't mean it. 20% means don't even try if you're the op. There's no way you can even get a chance to close to winning. Map on the top left. Red equals don't even run here if you're not a Republican. You have no chance. Blue equals don't even run here if you're not a Democrat. You have no chance. Gray equals competitive. Sometimes we vote for McCain, and then sometimes we think Obama has the right message. It depends on what the message is of the candidate at the year, the way democracy should work. Now you can fast forward, and it goes 1992 to 2000 in the first row. The second row is 2004 to 2012. The bottom row is 2016 and 2020. And when you look at 2016 and you compare it to 1992, all the grays almost totally wiped out. So in 30 years, we've gone from where we had half the country with competitive elections to how there's almost no county in all of America that's competitive, and every single county is I'm hardcore Dem or hardcore Republican, and this has happened over 30 years. It's called the big sort.
Mhm.
If this is true and it's leading to polarization, how do we fix this? How do we undo 200 to 300 million people ideologically sorting themselves over 3 decades? And can we do it relatively quickly because people are scared?
We could randomly assign half of these people to move somewhere that's entirely discrepant with their ideological views. I'm mostly kidding.
But besides short of a Stalin-esque sort of forced migration to different regions, if the big sort is responsible for polarization, because you can see the map on the very top, 1992 to 2000,
Mhm.
that is before gerrymandering. That is before social media. That is before Trump. And you still went from about a quarter to half the country got polarized. And so I've had these debates with people and they're going, it's gerrymandering, it's social media. And I go, explain these maps that occurred 20 years before.
Mhm.
How did we have polarization from gerrymandering if it happened before gerrymandering, if it happened before social media, if it happened before Trump? How did this happen? They went back in time and did this? It doesn't make any sense. And I can't get many people to give a really good answer. But if we're having polarization before all those things, and they only made it worse, and we've been doing this for 30 years, and it affects almost most of the country, about 200 to 300 million people, how do we undo this and get Humpty Dumpty back to working again?
Yeah.
Professional psychologist, how do we do this?
Well, that sort of large scale change may not happen for a very long time, but
Like 2 years? You mean like 2 years? Is that what
I
you mean?
I would say at least decades, but,
Decades.
if I were projecting, yeah,
Oh, why
um,
why is that? Why would it take decades to undo this?
well,
Talk to me like I'm 5. I know the answer, but like I don't understand, and I'm a layperson. Why
yeah,
would it take so long?
multiple reasons, but, chief among them that, it is in our nature as humans and as social animals to categorize ourselves into in groups and out groups, to think of ourselves as us versus them. And right now, one of the most powerful indicators of us in our society, at least, is political or ideological leanings. And so we are those who espouse the same political and ideological beliefs as we do, and they espouse the other set of beliefs. And this this division is pervasive. It leads to prejudice. It leads to lack of tolerance of those who have different views and belief systems. And the fact that we're becoming more polarized over time, that such a large scale change has occurred over the past 30 years, likely means that it'll take uh, at least that long to undo it. But
That's what I was looking for.
yeah, so encouragingly, though, if there's one silver lining, even though this is a large scale change, the sorts of things that I have suggested might take small incremental steps toward undoing such polarization are things that any of us can do, things that are very small scale. So, again, think about your own threshold, your own level of comfort. Maybe it's engaging with your mom, or my mom, on issues on which we disagree. Maybe it's attending a professional event with people in the audience or also in attendance that you know will feel differently about certain things than you do. Uh, Maybe it's establishing a meaningful friendship with not just waving hi to your neighbor who has a Trump sign in their backyard or in their front yard, but meaningfully engaging with them about the nature of their beliefs and why do they feel the way they do? What were some of the contributing factors? And having that back and forth. Now, again, different people will have different levels of comfort, willingness, readiness to do these sorts of things. And I think it depends in large part on relative levels of privilege versus disadvantage in society. But again, I would say assess your own threshold and start from there and see what you're comfortable doing, who you're comfortable engaging with, and start small if you have to.
One of the questions I had was, so if you look at this map, red and blue, I've heard some people say, well, just go talk to somebody who looks like a Republican at the coffee shop. And I go, well, hold on now. If you live in San Francisco, California, and you go to the coffee shop and talk to a Republican who lives in San Francisco, California, is it fair to assume they have the same values as a Republican who lives in downtown Kentucky? I mean, because I know my stepdad, he's technically a Republican. He technically voted for Trump. Hold on. My mom's full-blood Mexican. His friend's Mexican. I'm Mexican. He's also helped 8 undocumented people become citizens. That's not a typical Trump voter behavior. He voted for him for taxes. But I've also met people out of Kentucky who are Trump voters. They have a whole lot of values my stepdad does not. And so I'm thinking, if we're actually going to reduce the polarization, I, as a Californian, can't go outside and talk to a Republican in San Francisco. I got to talk to a Republican in hardcore red territory to really have the conversation, right? So it's not same thing with conservatives. I'm in rural Georgia. I'm going to go talk to these liberals and bring the country together. So I went and saw the liberal who lives in rural Georgia. Probably not as liberal as the liberal who lives in San Francisco, California. So if we're really going to do this, we got to have people having conversations where basically off this map, if you're in a blue district, you need to call someone in a red district. You can't talk to somebody also in your same blue district and go, well, I reached out to the other side. It's like they mostly think like you in voting patterns. Is that a fair thought?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And so for the past 10 years, I have lived in Ohio, which, I mean, now it's a bona fide red state, but prior to the last 4 to 8 years, it was a swing state. And so still, I have the impression that you can never really know unless you have an in-depth conversation what your neighbors or your coworkers' ideological views are. And in fact, one of my closest friends that I've made in Ohio voted for Trump in 2016, and she was one of the first people that I was able to have a non-confrontational, just really eye-opening conversation about our different belief systems. Turns out she was a coal miner's daughter, and she grew up with a very different set of values and beliefs than I did growing up in Southern California. And so I feel fortunate and privileged to live in an area of the country where I have people of different backgrounds and ideologies at my disposal. But if I look by contrast at my sister, who she and I align on most political belief systems and ideologies, but she lives in Davis, California. Yolo County went
Exactly.
Biden. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think we have different levels of tolerance for how much difference are we willing to engage with, and what do we think is beyond hope.
Ohio is still listed as a truly purple state. California's hard blue.
Oh yeah.
Ohio, from what I can tell from other, is one of the last remaining purple states. Mm-hmm. Where there's too many blotches of red and blue mixed up for you to evenly tell. But yeah. I've been told Ohio's one of the last of a dying breed. You're in the last of a dying breed area.
Yeah, and even in my county, so I'm in Athens County. Athens, Ohio is progressive college town, kind of like a hippie bubble in the middle of Appalachia. If you go just 5 minutes from the university in either direction, you'll see Trump signs, Confederate flags galore. So again, you never know who you might be talking to or interacting with. And that's, so I have lived for the past decade in a very, very different environment than somebody like my sister, despite us having similar political views.
Okay, last question. Some people have said, we were more polarized in the 1960s. it's worse than now. Calm down. We got through the 1960s. It can't be as bad as then. But then other people said, well, hold on now. The 1960s was definitely more violent than now. And we don't have that level of violence. But there is a difference. And I think as a psychologist, this will be particularly applicable for your expertise. I've heard, yes, the 1960s more violent than it is now. Here's the difference why it's more dangerous now. In the 1960s, everybody had faith in common institutions. They all believed in Congress and the authority of the Supreme Court, and a president was elected. That's the president. Maybe I don't like him, but they got elected. And now we have the lowest amount of confidence in every single federal branch. We have people who are actively saying, I defy the Supreme Court. We have one side who said, oh, I don't think your guy was elected, and I'm going to hold that belief for 4 years. And then the other side said, I don't think your guy was elected. I'm going to hold that belief for 4 years. And you had nothing remotely close to that in the 1960s. Fair synopsis or inaccurate?
As somebody who did not live through the 1960s, my perspective's probably somewhat biased, but in my view, they're just different challenges associated with each of these eras. So in the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement. We had Loving versus Virginia, where interracial marriage
Hey,
finally legalized, um, and so forth. But if you look at the 2020s, I mean, I wouldn't say it's gotten any less violent. Look at what's happening with the Black Lives versus All Lives and Blue Lives Matter movements, which I referenced at the beginning of our talk today. Look at all the controversy and lack of trust in the police as an institution, and the racial and ideological divides that are evident even there. I mean, I think one difference between now and the 1960s is we are, as a society, more racially, ethnically, religiously, in terms of gender identity, diverse. And with diversity comes challenges and learning experiences and opportunities. But with diversity, as we discussed earlier, also comes perceptions of threat from people who historically held the dominant group positions. So, yeah, again, it's on the face of it, things might seem easier now because of this or that law that's been passed since the 1960s. But when you really probe more deeply, there are unique challenges that we're seeing now that are they're different and in some ways more extreme than before.
Okay. I wasn't expecting you to say that. That's good and terrifying. Thank you. Okay, let me show you a clip. This is for you.
Okay.
Special gift. Have you ever heard of the show Designated Survivor?
No.
Okay. Let me see if I can pull this up. So the audio is probably not going to play well. Can you see the screen? That should be Kiefer Sutherland. Okay, so I'm going to play the audio separately on my phone. This is from the show Designated Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to try to play this at the same time.
According to the latest census projection, by 2045, this country will become minority white. That means at some point before 2050, whites will account for less than 50% of the population. That will be up against 25% Hispanics, 15% blacks, 5% Asians, and 7% your other multiracial populations. If things continue down this path, and if we fail to persuade people otherwise, these numbers are going to favor the other party. We are going to be voted out of office, and we will lose our grip on power.
Sorry for the cursing. That is a scene from Designated Survivor. And he's basically talking about the demographics that you were mentioning, but it was a little bit fictionalized, et cetera. But I found that was so he's a Democratic president, and they gave him this secret tape of a Republican strategy meeting where they're faced with this horrible reality. But I found it interesting that they did that on TV, and they kind of postulated how the Republicans would be thinking. I've never seen the Republicans acknowledge that, but basically the truth is there. You know, they're going to be out of a job. But it looks like what they're holding on to is limit the amount of people who vote, control state legislatures, and be able to control the federal government by controlling just a majority of states, if not the majority of the people. So that's their plan around this. Anyways, I thought you may find that interesting. I'll email you a copy of that. I forget what episode that is, but it's what you're talking about, at least mentioned in popular entertainment. I don't see it mentioned very often in popular entertainment. This is one of the few instances.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you so much for sharing. I may use this in my classes in the future.
I will get that to you, and the video has the exact episode and second where it is. So I'll get that.
Approximately what year was that made?
Find out right now. I got this in 2020. Designated Survivor came out. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Designated Survivor. Awesome series, by the way. It came out in 2016.
Oh, wow.
And I think that was season 3, which would have been about 2018 or 2019.
Yep.
When that came out. So series started 2016. That was it. That wasn't the first season. That was like at the second or third. So we're looking at 2017, 2018, where they're going, look at the stark picture of the potential future for the Republican Party. So I'll email you a copy of that.
All right. Thank you.
Recommendations. Is there anybody else you know who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation about political division in America? You don't have to, just we try to ask.
Yeah, I can send you a couple names after I think on it for a while.
Okay. We'll do that. We'll end it here. Oh, no. Well, last question, and this will be it. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third person watching this video. It's a week from now. They watch the video. We covered a lot of subjects. They don't remember them clearly, but they say, boy, there was this one thing that the professor said at the end, and it's 5 days later after I watched the video, but I can't get this thought she said out of my head. What is that one thing you want a total random person you've never met to not be able to get out of their head 5 days from now?
Gosh, the one thing I would say, politics have become an extremely important part of many people's identities. And this is one of the main reasons that we see so much polarization along ideological lines.
Succinct. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor. I'll email you a copy of the video. Great. And a copy of the link to Designated Survival, and I'll get some more information on the exact episode date. I'll get that to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
I hope you found that this was a fair interview, not gotcha journalism. We didn't try to put words in your mouth or change what you said, and you got to say your piece as you wanted.
Definitely. It's really interesting. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. I will email you shortly. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you. Have a good one.